Welcome everyone to today's session, and we thank you for your patience on running a little bit late. We hope you can give us at least 2 minutes while we wait for a few more people to join, and then we shall dive right in. All right, so we're going to start now, and we shall first of all thank everyone for joining us on this session today. This is a GYCAF's Season 2 webinar series, and today we'll be speaking about how to finance youth towards net zero. We'll also be speaking about what does net zero mean and how can young people be engaged, how have the panelists who are going to be speaking been engaging in pushing for the achievement of a net zero world. And just as a backdrop before my co-host Dolphin comes in, we wanted to give a brief introduction of who the speakers are so that all of you are aware and can interact with them and ask relevant questions. So we shall start with Toby Stanway, who is the Executive Director of Invest Net Zero. He has 20 years of experience in the energy industry and is responsible for economic planning, financial modeling, strategic investment analysis at London Energy, one of Europe's leading independent oil companies. In April 2021, he founded Invest Net Zero, a new company aiming to enable businesses of all sizes make a strategic investment in utility scale renewable infrastructure as the most cost-effective, robust, and long-term solution to achieving their decarbonization goals. So thank you, Toby, for being here on this call, and we are hoping to have an interesting session with you. We also have with us Alberto Cesar Ortiz, who graduated in geology at the University de Córdoba, Argentina. He started in Total Austral in 1997 and 3 years later joined Schlumberger as a petrophysicist based in Argentina and Brazil, focused on formation evaluation using wireline and logging while drilling measurements, very technical. All right, so in 2011, he joined YPF in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and from 2013 to October 2020 was assigned as a petrophysicist in the unconventional shale play reservoir characterization team. And he recently founded a consulting company, NZC Solutions. I'm sure he will tell us more about what this consulting company does. And then we also have with us Mark Campanelli, who, following a career in asset management, founded and now chairs Carbon Tracker Initiative, which is a non-profit focused on aligning the fossil fuel industry with goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. He also developed a capital markets thesis that was called Unburnable Carbon. I'm sure you can find it online. And with his 5 years of experience in sustainable financial markets, he's worked with major institutional asset management companies, co-founding some of the first responsible investment funds, some of which include Jupiter Asset Management. And right now he's serving on the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So he's probably has a lot of expertise with regards to how the financial sector works and how they're contributing to net zero, achieving the net zero target. And then lastly, but not least, we have Felipe Fonteselli, I hope I've pronounced that right, who is the director of ONG Sears, which was established in 2014, driven by a group of social sciences professionals with extensive experience in human rights issues, activism, and defense on human rights, with the aim of generating a space for reflection, action, and advocacy, which allows installing with a critical vision of human rights perspective. He recently, together with the organization, published a report on just transition that was done with young people. So it will be interesting to listen from him what the results were and if the people on the call can pick a leaf or two from it. So without further ado, I would like to ask Dolphin to take on from there.
Uh, Thank you very much, Maria. And it's indeed a very wonderful day, another second session of our initiative. And I think, like Maria has highlighted, we have a very broad and cross-cutting panelist and well-rounded, which is a very good job, I think, for us, the GYCAF team. So I'll just jump right straight over to Mark. Mark, Maria has highlighted that you have an outstanding, reputation, and you are actually the founder of the Carbon Tracker Initiative. And we know that everyone is talking about net zero, carbon emissions, Article 6, markets and market mechanism. If you don't mind, could you highlight to us what Carbon Tracker does basically, and how relevant it is basically within the climate change space, and how it relates to the net zero emissions? So if you could explain to us basically how basically your initiatives helped, whether it's countries, whether it's nations, how does it help contribute towards net zero emission? And if I don't know what you do, so I'm very curious about. I'm very looking forward to your presentation, but if you could also highlight whether some of your data and what you do, if it has any linkages with the IPCC reports, do you link to the scientific side of climate change discussion? So Mark, the floor is yours. Feel very welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be with you today. I've just put up a presentation. I can't quite tell. Can you see what I've put up on the screen? Where are we on the energy trend? Have you got that?
Yes. Yes, fantastic. We can see it. Well,
okay, because yes. I can go into some of these points that you've raised. So, yeah, my background is I spent many years in investment management, and I set up Carbon Tracker about a decade ago now. And now let me see if I can get screen forward to the first. There we go. There's about 30 of us in the team. Many of us have backgrounds in the City of London or Wall Street, managing money or advising on investments, particularly working for investment banks, producing research on coal, oil and gas. And our philanthropic purpose is to educate and inform the world's largest pension funds and asset managers about the energy transition. And our goal is to secure an energy system consistent with the science. And so, yeah, we do use a lot of the IEA scenarios. And in particular, we've just produced a new report that's come out this week that's looked at the IEA 1.5 degrees warming scenario and what that actually means for the fossil fuel sector. So that's who we are. All of our research is for free. You can download it from carbontracker.org. I tweet a lot about what we do. My Twitter handle is @Campanale_Mark. And Carbon Trackers is @Carbon Bubble. But the story I want for you today really is one of a lot of hope, I think, which is that the world is full of cheap and readily accessible clean energy sources like wind and solar. And now the real challenge is how we go about accessing it. But just before I talk about that, I want to look at where we are today. So if you speak to Exxon and Chevron and many of the fossil fuel majors, if you look at the slide on the left, many of them have planned these increases in oil supply and gas supply in particular, not just oil and gas, but also coal. And yet, if you look again on that left, oil production has to decline significantly to have any chance to get to 1.5. When I look at the plans of the Exxon and Chevron and the others, in some ways you could call it planning for climate failure. They've got no intention really of aligning their business plans with the Paris goals. And on the right there, these are the steep declines in emissions that we have to secure over the next 2-3 decades to get anywhere close. We have to halve emissions in the next 10 years and then halve them again. I mean, the challenge is as an extraordinary one. Is it doable? I think it's doable. We have the technology, we have the financial resources, and we have to get the policy in place. But let's look at some background. So why would the Global South in particular want to leapfrog into the clean energy solutions? And it's a very simple one. It's an economic one. Countries such as China, India, they're spending tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars a year in importing fossil fuels, typically from rich nations in the north, Russia, the Middle East, Canada, to some extent America. And if you take a country like India, it spends $60 billion a year on fossil fuel imports, and as a share of their imports, it's over a third of their imports. So there you have a compelling reason for the global south to get off of fossil fuels. It means you can get off from import dependency, really, and create energy independence on a just transition basis. And today, it's quite undeniable, renewable energy is the cheapest source of energy in most, if not all, parts of the world. And the potential economic opportunity there to be grabbed is the global south can start producing its own energy, could be an exporter of energy, cheap, clean energy. And let's take some simple metrics. So we reckon the global technical potential of renewable energy is around 6,700 petawatt hours, which is helpfully around 6,700 billion megawatt hours. And if you just subscribe around $10 a megawatt hour, the renewable energy potential globally is around $67 trillion, which is about the same size as global GDP. And for those in the UK has, if we just give $10 a megawatt hour, around $110 billion annually of renewable energy potential just in the UK alone. So the size, if we think of, well, the available fossil fuels, how much oil and gas does the world have? And economists then measure it and give a financial value to it. What I'm suggesting really with this slide is we should do the same with renewable energy. We should look at the world and say, what's the world's potential renewable energy opportunity? And where can we go about capturing that energy? And if you can see from the slide, in India, bulk energy generation from renewables, particularly utility photovoltaics, is around $33 a megawatt hour. Brazil is around 30, the US is around 37, and China is around 38. So versus traditional fossil fuels, more than competitive. And so this is the good news story, really. We have this cheap available resource. We know how to capture it. Now it's really the question about how we do that. And the more clean technology gets deployed, the cheaper it gets. So every doubling in production of solar and wind and battery storage, the price typically drops by about 20%. And then every doubling again, a similar reduction in costs. And that's why we've seen renewables get cheaper and cheaper. And if you live in the UK, you'll hear people talk about ground source heat pumps, which is a way of displacing gas in home heating. It only needs to get 25% cheaper for it to be cheaper than our existing gas-fired heating systems. And do I think a 25% reduction in price for ground source heat pumps is realistic? I think I do, because what we know from technology innovation over the last decade is we just see falling costs as companies go through these learning curves and learning rates where the more you produce, the cheaper it gets. And think of this from a global south perspective. Instead of importing expensive fossil fuels from rich global elites in the Middle East and Russia, you'll be able to generate it locally from local companies for the benefit of the local economy. And so this is my last slide, really. The greatest beneficiary of the renewable energy, clean energy revolution is the global south, where Africa, in our view, has the greatest renewable energy resource, about 1,000 times greater than the energy demand today in just Africa alone. And so that's the decade I think I'm looking forward to. That's what I'm looking for from the COP, is the mobilization of capital, whether from governments or from corporates or from investors, to take advantage of some of these opportunities. So I'm just going to stop there and hand back to you for any comments or reflections.
Thank you, Mark. I think that was a very insightful presentation. We can all agree, and I'm actually agree with what you're saying. You're looking at financing and how financing going into the COP26 in Glasgow, and that's really a very interesting topic, and that's why you're here. So I think we can see if we have any reactions from the audience, anyone with anything to say in line with that, as we look to for these discussions ahead. Anyone with any quick reactions, quick responses to basically Mark's presentation, which is quite insightful because you've actually mapped out how basically according to which region has the highest potential for basically for renewable energy. I can see someone has made a comment. I don't know if that's a hand raised.
Yeah, it was mine.
Yes. You can have
so I have a question. Like, you can evaluate the total value of the fossil fuel, like potential industry in terms of maximum capacity market, how much you can create, because it's a resource that has a limit here on Earth. While on the other hand, like renewable energies, they are called renewable because they don't actually have like a limit to them. I don't know, I'm thinking about solar or wind energy. So I can of course understand that the technology you need to build the infrastructure has a cost, and so it has actually a limit, but I don't see how can you evaluate the primary source, I mean, or at least it's so huge, like I don't know if you could cover like the entire Earth in solar energy, right? It's so a huge quantity.
This will come as a surprise, but the size of the footprint of the fossil fuel industry is greater than the size of the footprint of the solar industry, even when solar will displace fossil fuels. And it's one of the myths, really, of the fossil fuel industry that you have to cover the planet in solar panels, which of course isn't true. It's something like less than 1%, 1.5% of global landmass you'd need for renewables. And today, fossil fuels already cover around 2% or 1.85%. So
yeah, no, I completely agree on that. I probably haven't been clear about what I want to say. If I understood correctly, sooner you were talking about like there are companies that are studying like the maximum amount of renewable energy that you can actually create. As for example, I know there have been studies about the same thing in the oil industry, like how much oil do we have and how much is it worth, where it is located, and so on.
We do have reports like that, and on a potential renewable energy resource, if you go to our website, there's a report called "The Sky's the Limit," and we've done one for power and one for transportation that looks at the total size of the renewable energy resource globally, and we put a price on it, and then we compare that to
that's the point. I can't understand. Sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
That's the point. I mean, I can't understand how you can evaluate like the maximum amount of renewable energy given that it's renewable.
So it's about how you access it and deploy it, and how much of it you can capture for the same price as fossil fuels. So if you did a like for like replacement, how much would it cost to do that? These, I think, is the replacement costs, the cost of displacing fossil fuels. So we think there's around $30 trillion of fixed assets in the fossil fuel system that will be displaced by renewable energy opportunities. And we go into some of the detail on this in a report called "The Decline and Fall of the Fossil Fuel System." But the easiest thing to understand, and I think you already know this, is that the problem with fossil fuels is it's inherently inflationary. You have to go out to very difficult parts of the world to find oil and gas. You then have to transport it back to land, refine it and process it. If it's a gas, you have to maybe turn it into a liquefied natural gas and then transport it across the world. And then you have to turn it back into a gas again before you even use it. It just costs more and more to produce, whereas the reverse is true of renewables. The more you find, the more you access, rather, the cheaper it gets, and it's inherently deflationary. And I think this is the threat that the fossil fuel system faces, is the economics is fundamentally turning against it. And as you'll know, renewables ultimately, with their cheapness and in time their superior reliability, will just kill fossil fuels because of the bad economics. And that, I think, is the hope we can look forward to in the next decade or so.
Yeah, I get your point. And yeah, my question was, I think you have answered my question. Thank you. And I understand that the study you have on your site is like more of a comparison between the two types of energy sources than a study on a particular type of source, which is the renewables. I mean, it's made as a comparison, right?
Yeah, to an extent we do that kind of comparison. I think it's really trying to get to the heart of what is the available renewable energy resource to the world, and how cheap will it be to access, and who will benefit from it. And in our view, I think the good news is that it's the global south that will be the biggest beneficiaries, and we'll probably even get a democratic dividend. Those centralized economies, whether it's Russia or Venezuela or whether it's the Middle East, which concentrate wealth in the hands of very, very few people. The opposite will be true of renewables, is it actually will help to decentralize wealth, because people will not have to be dependent on importing oil or coal or gas. And ultimately this will create new financial freedoms and political freedoms, which I think is the renewable energy dividend that we should be looking forward to.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you for that wonderful engagement from the audience and also from the panelists. But I'd like to explain that we have a broad range of panelists. So I'd like to quickly jump onto Alberto. So Alberto, we know that the industrial era has been blamed for climate change and global warming because of emissions as a result of the industries and basically the companies. We want to give this opportunity to tell us what net zero does, net zero solutions, does in light of this, and how you work with companies and how you support basically the companies and the industries to basically shift towards a net zero, strategy and engagement. So welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. Well, yes, our idea with my partner was to create a company that could provide the service and products regarding the net zero carbon world. We call it Net Zero Carbon Solutions. We are based in the United States, and our idea is to, to work in the for the future in different ways and in different perspectives. Most, I will say, not all of us, but most of us are coming from the oil industry, so we have plenty experience on the oil industry, and we are moving and shifting to the future with this company. So we believe, I don't know if you're saying, perhaps you can see my presentation. Yes, we think of there is no planet B, so we have to make a huge effort in order to save the world and try to reduce emissions as soon as possible. But we need to be smart on that. It's not a very simple answer how to save the planet and decrease emission. So we created a company that wants to be innovative, agile, and with strong commitment with the, of course, with the client services, but as well with the society and with the sustainability of sustainability. So we focus on two things. We focus on carbon dioxide storage studies in order to put properly all the emissions that are being created by the different industries. We have a knowledge about how to deal with the subsurface subsurface environment. We know how the rock is, where the pore is, how much the pore can support the carbon dioxide storage. So we are working with CO2 storage. We strongly believe that the carbon dioxide, or what we call a CCS or CCUS, is the only technique, or not the unique one, but is one of the big one that will help in the future to decrease our emissions. Because we think we have technology today with renewables, but it's quite difficult to obtain in a very short period of time a good amount of reductions in carbon dioxide. So one of the key points that we want to highlight is the study of the subsurface and where are the best places to store the CO2. For that reason, we have a service to evaluate the rock, evaluate the permeability, the porosity, how much can be stored in that. And also we have a work done in how to ensure that the carbon dioxide will be properly stored underground with permanent reservoir monitoring sensors. Those are critical in the future because one thing is to put the carbon dioxide underground, and the other one is to ensure that it will be keep it for 1,000 years and it will not come back to the atmosphere again and have the problem again. We have several other activities regarding the geothermal for high enthalpy and low enthalpy. We strongly believe that the geothermal it could be a key energy in the future. We think that the wind and solar energy could be a very important energy for the future, but we think that to be in order to be sustainable, I think we have to go for something that will not consume more silicon or will consume more aluminum. And for that, I think geothermal it could be a very good energy source that it could help in the future, not only for volcanoes as been today being used as the main source for geothermal, but also for other sources of heat that could be not in a range of 160 degrees Celsius, but in a range of perhaps 100 or even less temperature that could help us to use that energy. There's a microphone open there. We have another. Hello. Okay. Who? I'm sorry.
Yes, we can hear you. Kindly could you, if you're joining, kindly mute yourself, and we can have our speaker continue with the session. Yes, I think Alberto, you can continue.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry for the interruption.
Yes, we have another area of business, which is the waste management and utilization. The idea of this equipment is to utilize to get energy from the waste. It could be a biomass or even waste from different cities, plastics, and so on, in order to generate electricity and generate hydrogen that we strongly believe that will be the energy for the future. And finally, we have a specialist that can help us to decarbonize the different facilities. We have engaged with some key universities in Europe who work to decarbonize some facilities. And also we have a chance to measure the carbon footprint. We are working as well in what we call the natural-based solution, or NBS. Those are based in Argentina. The idea is to set up carbon by forestry, by a specific project that are related to forestry and biodiversity. And from the other side, we have experience on unconventional shale play reservoirs. We strongly believe that the world will continue consuming some energy, and we want to shift and accelerate the shift from oil to gas, and help the companies to get the gas from unconventional reservoirs. And by doing that, it will be another step for decarbonization. I'm sorry. We think that the decarbonization of the oil industry will have to be soon, but not only soon. I don't think the oil industry will have to stop producing hydrocarbons in the coming years, and I think perhaps the best way to decarbonize them, it will be to make a shift from oil to gas, or from carbon to gas. And we have expert teams in how to do that with the shale plays, or what we call them conventional reservoirs. And we provide solution and consultancy for those companies who are willing to decrease their emission by shifting from oil to gas. And also, because we know how to deal with the subsurface conditions, we can help companies with our expertise from geologists, petrophysicists, and engineers for a project that are called enhanced oil recovery. Those projects are willing to utilize the carbon dioxide from different emissions, so source emissions from industry, and try to make a storage underground, but also try to increase the recovery for the oil by trying to, I would say, to storage, and at the same time to recover more oil by using the carbon dioxide. This will be in a short period of time, because I mean, in the long term, for sure, those emissions will have to be cut by the Paris Agreement. But we think that the utilization of oil reservoirs, oil, gas, and oil reservoirs to store CO2 will be one of the first objectives for decarbonization of the industry and for the oil business. So this is what I have to present. I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Indeed, this is quite interesting. So I'll just take quick reactions, and then we'll save the questions basically for after all the speakers are presented. We have 2 more speakers on the go. So a quick reaction from the audience. We welcome that. A quick reaction. Kindly mute. So a quick reaction from the audience, maybe one quick question from just one brief quick question from the audience. Kindly. We'd like to ask you to basically mute your mic if you're not speaking, and if you have a question, kindly raise up your hand. So I'm sorry for muting everyone. I will unmute you shortly. So I think if we don't have any other questions, so I would want to welcome Toby to basically tell us what he does, basically in light with the net zero world, and if possible, if he could highlight to us, yes, what he does. Yes, thank you, Toby.
Oh, thank you very much.
Go, Toby!
Oh, okay, thank you. So yeah, no, I haven't got a formal presentation. I can sum up my new company in very quickly, actually. I think one of the challenges to going to invest net zero is to get that investment into that renewable infrastructure, and how you position yourself within the renewable world can make a real difference to your future as a company. So really, what I'm aiming to do is to add that ability for companies of any size, for a wide range of industry, to make that strategic investment and add to the stock of renewable electricity for themselves. And it really touches on what Mark pointed out earlier about the democratization, as it were, of the new energy world, and allowing as many industries and market players to invest directly as possible.
Thank you, Toby. Maybe a quick reaction from the audience. So if someone would want to say something about how Toby has, however, highlighted basically what he does in light with the net zero. If not, I'm hoping that we'll have a round of questions at the end. So we have another interesting gentleman. He's called Felipe, and Felipe works within the Just Transition agenda. And basically, I'd like to ask Felipe to support us basically based on the projects to unpack to the audience what a just transition means within this context of climate change, because everyone is talking about just transition and you want to know how just transition relates to climate change, relates to NDCs, basically how it relates to all this discourse, and how is it supporting this issue of CBDRC principle, common but shared responsibility, and how is it going to fit in towards Glasgow, given that finance is one of the key agendas. So what is this just transition? So Felipe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dolphin. And can I first ask how much time do I have to answer this very complicated and intricate question?
You might not have much, maybe a bit of we can give it 5 to 10 minutes. I don't know. Yes.
Super. That works. And it's a full disclaimer. It's hard to explain what a just transition is because it's got a lot of history. It's a concept that has evolved through time, and depending on who uses it, it means something different. There are various discourses around. So I'm gonna do my best to summarize what we have found in our investigation and our project in the following 10 minutes. For a little bit of context, my name is Felipe Fontesilla. I work for the Center for Social Reality Studies in Chile. And over the past year, we have been working with 2 other organizations in a project that seeks to create shared meaning in Latin America for what a just transition means. A just transition is a concept that is born in the 70s, 80s, beginning of the 80s, late 70s, you start finding it in particular labor organizations that are starting to see a shift in their communities, where countries start to go from a very extractivist economy and start going into more environmental kind of spaces. So a lot of jobs are left out, and a lot of communities have to adapt and shift. So the labor organizations, including the International Labor Organization, start thinking about, well, what's gonna happen when all of the energy matrix shifts from a fossil energy matrix into a green energy matrix. And they start coming up with ideas as to how to make sure that this transition, that this process considers their realities and their necessities. However, that being said, just transition is a concept that is originated in the global north, and therefore there are a lot of issues that are not considered in the general conceptions of what a just transition is. So with these other organizations in Latin America, we started building a project that seeks to create shared understanding, to see what does a just transition mean for us. We consider that the energy transition is an imperative for our communities or countries or nations. That is something that is gonna happen. And we also come from the ground that our communities in the region have been significantly and disproportionately impacted by the extractivist industry. So I'm going to share my screen for a hot second, and I want to show you very briefly what we found through this process. We conducted a series of dialogues with different organizations of civil society. These were open dialogues where we brought specifically folks from the environmental, the indigenous, the feminist, and labor unions, the feminist movement and labor unions, to think collectively about what is it that we need when this transition occurs. And through that process, we came up with a series of principles and recommendations for decision makers and for civil society who are interested in addressing this issue. So a just transition is a disputed concept. It is contextual. It's not unequivocal. It's and more than a concept, more than just one concept, is a gradient, right? Depending on who uses it, it goes from the creation of new jobs for a green economy to a complete social transformation. And there is a matrix, and you can see it in our final report as well. There is a matrix between proposals of a just transition or discourses of a just transition that are more conservative, that are on the status quo thing side of the spectrum, and there are other discourses on the just transition that seek to create a real and profound social transformation to the socioeconomical systems that rule a particular community or a particular country. These are some of those discourses, right? And depends on how open, how much reach it has. And apologies for the graphic in Spanish. We're currently working on translating all of our results. And how inclusive their perspective is. Are we involving a lot of people, or is this transition only just for some groups, right? So from those, there is different kinds. There are transformative, there are procedimental or procedural notions of a just transition, and there are the more status quo kind of concepts of a just transition. What we did and what we found is that what we need in Latin America goes towards the more transformative side of things, because the energy matrix and the extractivist industry is so deeply rooted and embedded in our economies and our realities that it's really hard for us to transition without a complete social transformation. So some of the few questions that we ask ourselves are like, who is using the concept in the region? What are Latin American discourses positioned in this gradient? How can civil society use and adapt this concept? And we seek to create this collective understanding. So I'm going to jump very quickly through this. But these are some characteristics that we found for just transition in Latin America. First of all, the imperative of a transition is not assured. The need for decarbonization and the defossilization of our societies is not fully assured yet. But many governments are still promoting oil, gas, coal as some of the solutions. We found that there is a significant difference between what we're doing in Chile at the moment, where we are closing our thermoelectric plants, and what's happening in Argentina, what's happening in Bolivia, what's happening in Peru. The heart of a just transition, it's not just work, but socio-environmental conflicts. We also found that a lot of these transitions are not necessarily, or the problems that come associated are not exclusive to labor, are not exclusive to work, but it's the entirety of the socio-environmental conflicts that come as a result of this transition. Territories that are impacted by the extractivist industry generally suffer the consequences and receive none of the profits that come from the industry. So just transition is experienced from the territories as a demand to end the conflict produced by mining, oil, and agro-industrial and fracking projects. The historical depth with the zones of environmental sacrifice. So in Chile and in Latin America, we've got a bunch of sacrifice zones that are territories or spaces where all of the trash and the garbage and the impacts of the industry are set, right? We worked with a few of these sacrifice zones in our projects, trying to visualize first the realities, and second, to include their perspectives in our results. And one of the things that I personally found incredibly interesting is that it's not enough with transition from a fossil energy matrix into a green one, or a renewable energy matrix, but it has to come with the consideration of the territories that have been disproportionately impacted by it. Because, for example, Chile right now is pushing very strongly green hydrogen as one of the solutions to our transition, and also as an opportunity for economical development. But they're thinking about building the infrastructure for green hydrogen in the same spaces that have been historically used for thermoelectric plants. So the same sacrifice zones that we have at the moment are going to suffer again the impacts of the green economy. So the debate of the transition goes beyond a liberation, moves to the territories that are affected by fossil fuels and their health problems and the environmental pollution. The impact in sacrifice zones, the social and environmental impacts are many and are very profound as well. It impacts children development, it impacts people's health because of pollution and contamination of water, air, and soil. Another characteristic is that we need to overcome energy poverty, and there is a demand for energy access in a region with energy poverty, right? Where distributed generation strategies or communal energy cooperatives are still scarce. And we have in Chile, we have in Latin America, a large portion of folks, of communities, of groups that live either in informal settlements and have no access to energy whatsoever, or folks who have limited access to energy. And it's a problem that goes often overlooked because of the amount of energy that we are able to produce. But what we fail to consider is that often that energy that is produced is funded and produced by the mining and oil companies and is used for them as well. So you got spaces where you got thermoelectric plants, where you got large energy production, and you got a lot of impact that result from that energy production. But the folks who live in those communities don't have the access, don't have the full access to that energy, and receive very little profits or things from the industry. Fifth, clean energies do not necessarily ensure ecological and social sustainability. For current projects, the abuse of human rights is denounced, and new projects that may continue to reproduce the same patterns are warranted. So we still have, as I was mentioning, this problem with the green hydrogen. Where do we put it? Where do we put the green hydrogen plants? It's just one of the very examples that we are currently dealing with, and that is a result, in our view, from structural issues as to how we make these decisions, right? Who is included in the process of decision making. And six, the relevance of effective participation and the value of articulating the discourses of the transition with other social struggles. We need to propose an empowerment and inclusion, the empowerment and inclusion of the various actors present in the territories for a common agenda, which allows a collective reflection on the problems of extractivism and the possibility of getting out of that model, of thinking about new development models that are sustainable, that go along with the sustainable development goals, that go along with the climate challenges, etc. The proposal for the definition, this is what we're working with and that we're currently sharing with different groups across the region, is that in Latin America, Just Transition proposes an energy transition that transforms the power relations between large emitters and the rest of the world to stop the advance and deepening of socio-environmental conflicts, while promoting ecological restoration processes, energy sovereignty, a participatory democracy, and unrestricted respect for human rights, recognizing and paying special attention to groups that are usually excluded and violated in the region, such as workers, women, dissidences, LGBTIQ+ communities, and indigenous peoples. For this, the technological change towards renewable sources must be translated into an opportunity to transform our economic model towards one that allows respect for the planetary limits, a substantial improvement in the quality of life of people and ecosystems, the creations of jobs, dignity, and a local development based on the self-determination of the peoples whose territories, whose center is a good living. And here, the good living is actually a concept that goes a little bit more deep into the Summa Cum Sai. It's a concept that comes from indigenous cosmovision and understanding of living. So these are some of the principles, and I'm afraid that I'm gonna run out of time because I don't wanna extend me too much, but these are the principles that we found through our participatory process, were at the core of the discourses that civil society have related to a just transition. So first is planning and decentralization. Second is reparation and restoration. Third is equity. Fourth is democratization. Fifth is sovereignty and self-determination. And sixth is the potential for a socio-ecological transformation. What do I mean with this? Democratization, we're focusing on participation and human rights. Communities and the territories must engage, must be including in the decision-making regarding this transition. We need to make sure that the various actors involved and who have been disproportionately impacted are at the center of the decision-making, are at the center of the creation of the just transition strategies in the region. Second, sovereignty and decentralization. We seek autonomy. We want our territories, want our communities to be able to decide how and for what and who they're producing energy for. Self-management, they need a greater role, they're seeking a greater role and incidence of the community in the generation of energy at the local level. With territorial identity, the metric adapts to the scale of the territories, and we need to make sure that capacities, we're producing the necessary technology in the countries themselves so as not to import the materials and training of workers to participate in the process. So we're not just externalizing and sharing. We want to stop being a region that is extracted to then be processed and for the technological development to happen in the global north. Reparation and restoration is about taking into account the damages that come during energy development and restore the environment that is impacted by it, or generate economic compensation to communities and workers that are disproportionately affected by the transition, and to eradicate slaughter areas or the sacrifice zones. With equity, we're seeking to solve the problems of energy poverty through mechanisms that make energy clean, accessible, reliable, and affordable. The territories where energy projects are installed benefit from their generation, from the energy generation, supplying the localities and delivering work, creating new, better, dignified jobs. Avoid the creation of new sacrifice zones associated with the impacts of renewables and the extraction of minerals necessary for the transition, and a redistribution of wealth. When we're talking about the development of a new economic model, we're thinking that we need to put equity at the center, at the core of this transformation. A planned transition means that decarbonation needs to avoid job losses for workers and needs to center on community development. There are examples in the world where energy transition, or where the transition from an extractive economy to a restorative economy has been done intelligently, where these cities or communities have been transformed to be cultural and social hubs, where there has been the creation of universities and museums, and all sorts of other cultural infrastructure to revitalize the society and to make sure that the folks who live in those areas have access to capacities, to capacity building, to capacity development, to adapt to the changes that their communities are experiencing. Avoid mega projects during the transition. It doesn't like, if you have a thermoelectric plant and then you want to transform that into hydroelectric, you can't just install a mega hydro plant, because it's going to have significant impacts in the environment and in the communities that live nearby, right? So avoid mega projects, implement the diversification plans for energy matrices, compliance with a demanding environmental assessment, which is something that often gets overlooked, although we have a lot of regulation and legislation in place. For example, in Chile, to protect the environment, a lot of the environmental assessments are not monitored and they don't comply to them. So oftentimes what happens is that they bypass the regulations without much fiscalization. And the management of waste caused by renewables. And sixth and last, and with this, I can stop. This potential for a socio-ecological transformation include the stop of subsidizing fossil fuels and the dependence on extractivism. We need to change the production model to other activities with greater complexity. We need to decrease the demand for energy, right? We need a social transformation that decreases the demand for energy. Installing renewables is not enough. The ownership, control, scale, and objectives of projects need to be changed. We need to reconnect with ancestral forms of relationship with nature. We need to avoid green capitalism and false solutions like biodiesel, gas, fracking, incinerators, and just transition as a civilizational change. We see the energy transition. We see the time that we're in as a space for huge social and economic transformations. And we think that with the care that is necessary, we think that with the inclusion of different actors and different voices in these processes, we can achieve indeed the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. We think that we can work towards creating new and better adaptation plans, and we can reduce the losses and damages that we're going to experience in the near future. And with that, I shut up. I'm sorry that if I extended myself too much.
Thank you, Felipe, for that insightful presentation. That's a very wonderful presentation, and I'm glad to learn about what you're doing in Latin America, and we to learn more. Actually, I'm actually learning more about the whole just transition philosophy, if I may call it that. Before I hand over the floor to everyone, because I think we have had basically array of information, very, very, very informative information, so that our audience doesn't get a bit too overwhelmed. I'd like to start with Toby, and then we can pass it over to basically the other panelists, and basically then we can open the floor to a Q&A and reactions from the audience. So Toby, in light of what has been said, in light of what you do, and in light of everything, what is the difference between a net zero and a zero carbon world, and how does any of them differ from what we have currently? So Toby, I think I can throw that to you. Okay. What is the difference?
Well,
yes, I'll throw that to you.
Thank you for the question. I'm sorry, my video camera seems not to be restarting up, so I'm just going to do it on the audio if that's okay. I think the first thing to say here is there is a difference between net zero and zero carbon. And the key difference there is net zero implies you're still producing CO2 through the consumption of fossil fuels in one form or the other, but you're offsetting those in some way. And that offsetting has come in for some criticism. You know, it said that it allows polluters to keep polluting, but it continues to encourage investment in carbon infrastructure, and that it's, you know, deferring the problem. And there are some other issues as well surrounding offsetting. It's how it's accounted for. You know, that can be very complicated and potentially untransparent. And there's also the issue of what are the other qualities of those offsetting products, those offsetting projects. You know, decarbonization is a part of that wider ESG universe, as some of the other speakers have touched on. And that includes issues as biodiversity and social impacts. And I think the companies are becoming more aware of those issues in terms of the biodiversity elements of, say, a reforestation project and the social impacts that projects may have. And on the accountability front, you know, in order to monitor these things, it's necessary to follow some core principles. You know, you don't want to double count, for example, and preferably you need to follow the principle of additionality. You're genuinely adding new carbon sinks, and this is an issue that is reflected on the other side of the equation, on the supply side of the equation of renewable energy as well, is that it's actually about the development of new renewable projects as well. And you know, the accountability, that's where the importance of transparency and credible third-party certification needs to come in. But you know, we shouldn't write off offsetting. You know, it's a legitimate, and it allows time for the development, the further development of those alternative options, like electrification and hydrogen, for those activities for which, you know, electrification is not currently realistic or may never be realistic. But I think a lot of companies do already recognize that offsetting is the least favorite option behind the alternatives that lead to the sort of fundamental zero carbon approach rather than the net effect. So, you know, in terms of the ideal for the net zero world, well, I don't think there is an ideal, as it were. It's more complicated than that, but how do we get there? In a sense, we have to pull together, and I know that's an easy thing to say, and let's try and look at what that means in practice in some sort of detail. Well, you know, one of the key elements is it's going to need some investment, some genuine investment. And it's been made very clear in the European market sense, which is where I'm based, that, you know, public investment's not sufficient. So, or is not going to be sufficient. So we have to look at where practically does that other investment come from. And the answer is that there's a variety of sources and a variety of methods of attracting that. So let's look at, you know, investment in new renewable infrastructure, which is where my new business really focuses. You know, at the moment, you have investment funds investing, and you also have industry investing for themselves in this renewable generation capacity. And there are certain ways you can do that. I mean, you can take out a PPA, a power purchase agreement, which effectively guarantees an offtake price for a certain quality, and that helps a fund or a developer have the financial security to undertake an investment themselves. or you can invest yourself directly. And the drivers for industry for getting into, for doing the right thing and to decarbonize comes from a whole range of sources. You know, it comes from the consumer, it comes from the investors, but it also comes from regulators. And for a fund, for example, obviously it comes from their investment mandates. But it doesn't require just investment in that, it also requires investment in new grids, in interconnections, in storage, and actually usage models as well. And I think the thing to point out is that, you know, individual companies are going to be in the best position to decide what best works for them. So if I think if one says there is an ideal for the net zero world, as it were, it's going to be to try and find those genuinely long-term solutions and enable the cost of those investments, when you're looking at investment, to be as low as possible, not only for your company, but also for via that for society as a whole. You know, someone has to pay the electricity bill at the end of the day. And so actually finding methods and ways to make these investments that are necessary at the lowest cost possible is actually doing some real good, not just to the individual company, but also to society.
Thank you, Toby, for that highlight that you've given. And I don't know if we have a question from our audience, or we could give we could give the other panelists if they'd like to attack the question some more and add to what Toby has highlighted on the difference between net zero and a zero carbon and how it deviates from our ideal situation. So Felipe or Alberto, unfortunately, Mark had to leave. He has another event, but he will take up your questions. We would be able to send him an email and he'll be able to respond to them. So Felipe or Alberto, if you have any questions, or yes, as we wait for the audience, or if anyone from the audience. I mean, if you'd like to add on to what has been highlighted by Toby on a net zero and a zero carbon, if you have anything to add from any of our remaining three speakers.
Yes, I agree. Well, we were discussing about the differences between the net zero and net zero carbon. Yes, I think we need to assume that the future will not be our net zero carbon will not be achievable in the coming decades if we do not realize that we still need the fossil fuels as a source of energy in order to continue making the world moving, I will say. I mean, there's no way that the energy consumption will stop. And actually on that, I think we need to realize that in the future we will have to continue using the energy for fossil fuels. But we need to try to switch to renewables and try to increase the gas consumption instead of oil and carbon in order to reduce emissions. You know, that's my point of view.
Thank you, Alberto. Felipe, if you'd like to add something, we have a range of questions also coming from our social media platforms. So Felipe, before I give the audience the
Yeah, I think that we're at a point where we need to do everything, right? We need to move very quickly and we need to transform our economies into green economies as fast as we possibly can. I think Alberto is right when he says that the net zero targets are currently with things as is very unachievable. And that's very concerning, because when we say they're unachievable, we're still seeing that there are going to be groups of people disproportionately impacted by the impact of climate change. So some groups, the large emitters, the large greenhouse gas emitters, the folks who own the extractivist industry in the global south are the ones who are profiting from it, and the ones that at the moment have control over how fast that change occurs. And we need to do it quickly. We need to advance very quickly. So I think that whatever it is that we can push together, it's going to be incredibly important.
Thank you, Felipe. We have a round of questions. We have some from our Facebook viewers because we're live on Facebook. We also have a question from, I can't pronounce the name, Valdislav. And I'll give you the floor before I move on to the array of questions that are coming from our Facebook audience. So you have the floor.
Yeah, it's still me. I'm sorry I'm the only one talking. So I have like two questions, but one is really has a really short answer. I can't really understand how gas can be considered like a green source of energy, given that it's well, it's not. And so I'd like the panelists talking about it, like to make me understand. I think that we can use it like to delay the crisis, but not actually as a solution. And honestly, in my opinion, but correct me if I'm wrong, using gas as like a green energy, it creates more confusion especially in the public opinion. And so people, well, you're still emitting and without realizing it, because companies will sell it as a green source of energy. And so it simply slows down, and the climate emissions still creating problems, and without public conscience. I think it's a bigger of problem than a solution. But anyway, the other question is about the net zero targets. I mean, of course, I understand that we can arrive to a complete stop of emissions. I mean, everything we do has some emissions related to it. I don't know, the food sector, even the health sector. I mean, everything around us has probably something to do with emissions. But I can't really agree on the fact that oil companies can be seen as, as companies that are doing I don't understand how we can consider those companies like in line with the climate, with the Paris Agreement, because actually their net zero emissions means that they are emitting a lot, like really a lot. And if they are not putting those emissions on the final consumer, which is something that, for example, a company in Sweden is trying to do, they are selling oil and saying that that is kind of green oil because they don't count the emissions from burning it, but they simply count the emissions from extraction, which doesn't really make sense. I hope you can see that. Anyway,
well, no, if I may, I think that's an interesting question. I mean, my new business is actually entirely in renewables, but as someone who's been in the past in the oil industry, I think, you know, if one looks at, say, a manufacturing company or a car company, one of the things that's often cited in a sustainability report for a machine manufacturer is the fact that they have developed more efficient engines that enable their consumers to reduce what they would see as scope, but would be defined as their scope 1 emissions, as it were, by having a more efficient engine, either personally for driving or as an industry for producing their manufactured good and running their industrial processes. So it does come back actually to that strict definition as to whether burning fossil fuel in, say, your car or in your gas turbine in your factory, as it were, is a scope 3 emission for an oil company who produces it, or whether it's a scope 1 emission for that industrial process. And I think it is as yet undecided on that. That's still an open question, and that's still something open for debate out there, as it were. But it does go, you know, we touched earlier on the need in terms of recording and accounting for things properly, that this need not to double count. And as part of addressing that question as to what that counts as, I think one needs to be careful not to double count on that front as well, because is it scope 1 for somebody, or is it scope 3? There's a question of, well, is that not mutually exclusive?
Yeah, that's exactly my point. And well, I see that you can see my concern. And also related to that, so except the fact on double counting and who's actually has to like take responsibility for some emissions, there is also the point that like net zero emissions from an oil company, which means they are offsetting them somewhere because they aren't switching, for example, to green sources of energy. They are simply offsetting them like in planting trees or anything else. Or for example, in capture and storage technology, it means that they're emitting a lot and then somehow usually thanks to technology or other projects, they are like, counting the emissions away. It's from, for example, in regards of technology, capture and storage, those are at the moment projects that take a lot of energy. They are really like energy intensive projects, and therefore they are using much more energy that they could use by simply switching to green sources of energy, which aren't oil products. So in my opinion, simply those companies should shut down or move to other things. I mean, you don't have to extract oil. That's the point. And you don't have like to find loopholes to use other technologies not in order not to count your emissions. Just stop emitting. I don't know if you see like my point, but I think it's really simple. And yeah, so if you can give me an answer on the gas question and on this one. Sorry it took so long.
It's okay. I don't know if Felipe would like to answer, because we also have an array of questions from our Facebook audience just before they divulge in. There's one question to the GYCAF team. There's someone asking, watching Facebook Live, am I wrong in saying gas is not a green source of energy? Therefore, shifting from oil to gas is not effective. That's the first question. Then the second question, do you agree that the main solution out of this is simply not emitting? I think it also resonates with what our participant has been putting. And can CO2 capturing is an emergency, and that CO2 capturing is an emergency solution, not really working on a long-term perspective. So as we answer the question from, of course, within our session, and I'd like to also the speakers to also think around the questions that have been asked basically by the audience watching on Facebook Live. We'd like, as a GYCAF team, like to apologize for the disturbing images that have been basically portrayed during this session. I think we have a bit of hacking issue, and I think our communications and tech team are on the case, and we are devising appropriate engagement framework moving forward in regards to this and the rest of the sessions that are coming up. So with that, I can hand it over to the panelists to continue answering them. And yes, just be quick and brief so that we move on to the next session. Yes, thank you.
I have a comment that I would like to share, but I'm wondering if Toby wants to answer first. Just so the question was directed towards you, I think.
I think we've already talked to the offsetting, and I think one must of course remember as well, the value that oil and gas and hydrocarbons does create, and the wealth and the freedom that creates. So I think it's not realistic to say that we should we can just stop producing and stop using immediately. There has to be some balance there. As I say, my aim right now is to try and encourage and help with a solution that enables people to make that transition in a cost-effective and robust way. But yeah, I think an offsetting is a useful tool to offset the necessary emissions. The necessary emissions. Let's just leave it at that. Yeah.
Yes, regarding
Yeah, so I think that oh no, go Albert.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong saying that the gas is not. I mean, it's not the green source of energy. That's for sure. But we will have to do something in order to continue consuming energy and try to do not emit too much. You know, and actually there is a chance for the gas to be transformed to hydrogen. There is a technique that is being evaluated for a big scale, which transform gas or methane to hydrogen, and by doing that you reduce the amount of emissions, and you can storage the CO2 associated to that transformation from gas to hydrogen, and then you will not be able to emit anymore. But there's something that will take a bit of time. But I think the worst is just to continue using the carbon or even the oil to generate electricity, because by doing that we can be in big troubles in the future. Actually, some countries are talking about the transforming the cars from oil combustion to electricity, but if you don't change your source of energy, your generation of electricity, you will have the same problem. Even if you use your country, you have 100% of electric cars, you know. So there's something that need to be. I mean, we know the gas is not the best, but it's something that we will have to use in the coming decades in order to decarbonize the world.
Yeah, so I want to offer a reflection on this area without being an expert in any of the technological developments that are being proposed to solve the climate crisis. But I think that there is a lot of noise with regards to certain technologies that are being proposed as the solution to the climate crisis, like carbon capture storage, for example, or any other geoengineering proposals. I think one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is, where are we investing, right? Where are we investing our money? And right now, what we're facing is a problem of financing in the global south for green projects. We're experiencing the lack of financing for non-governmental organizations that are working on these issues. So there are a lot of communities who have already offered solutions. We've got a bunch of resources and tools that are nature-based solutions that we know they are effective, right? If we want to capture carbon, we need native forests to be restored in the region. Yet in Chile, we're thinking about our solution to it is going to be creating new green hydrogen plants. However, the forestry problem is not going to be solved. The use of land, it's not going to be changed, right? So it's a systemic issue that we need to be very careful. How do we address it? Because the moment you switch one variable in the system, you're impacting another 1,000. So what I see is, I think it's very important for us, and I'm going to speak like to the young people in the area, for us to be constantly educating ourselves in all of these solutions that are being proposed, because a lot of them come with significant negative impacts. I think that when we take gas, when we take a look at natural gas, when we take a look at fracking, the impacts and the use of resources generally outshine the benefits, right? The costs are larger, particularly when it comes to fracking. So I think we need to be very careful as to how we approach these solutions and which ones do we want to focus our attention in. And we as civil society, and I'm speaking from my perspective as a member of a civil society organization, a member of a movement, I think we have the capacity to push towards the solution that makes most sense to us, to our realities and our communities. And that comes from the way that we do things, from our daily habits, from where do we invest our money, from which banks do we keep our money in, which organizations we bring into the dialogue, and so on and so forth, and what we demand our governments to do and push as well. So I think that we as young people, we as part of the social movement for climate action, for climate justice, we have the power and the capacity to push towards certain solutions to be prioritized. And I think that we need to use it, because the more and more that we get into this, or the deeper that we get into the climate change issue, we're seeing a bunch of different solutions being popped up. We need to make sure that we guide them, that we guide all of this power, all of this investment power towards the right direction, and we step away from false solutions and start moving into true, real solutions, which include, as the person Vladislav, I think, was saying, that includes a social and cultural shift in the way that we use energy, in the way that we distribute energy, who uses it, and for whom it is generated. I think it's a very important question that we need to address. So yeah, that's just the reflection that I wanted to offer. Be very careful.
Thank you for this. I think this has been a really fruitful discussions, and I don't think the net zero discussion and the discourse around it can actually be unpacked over one session. So I don't think we'll go through the whole program as we had planned, but I think I'd like to welcome my colleague Juliet or Maria if they have any more issues that we might have time to unpack today, so that we also don't keep our panelists and our speakers basically on this call for too long, because it gets a bit exhausting. So Juliet or Maria, if there's any issue that we have not unpacked, otherwise we can open the floor again for continued discussion. Okay, I think she is not, yes, she's here.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, so I just wanted to say also thank you so much to the speakers. I mean, I know it's been a challenging session because of what happened, and thanks, Dolphin, for explaining. What we will do is we shall edit the video before we put it again out there, so that most of what has been spoken, especially the key points on net zero, climate mitigation, and all that is addressed clearly. And as Dolphin said, I think it's going to take more than just one session to unpack net zero, and we will be having another session next week that is more or less related to this. It will be on the carbon pricing element of it and some new terminologies in the space like quantitative easing. So you might want to attend that session. But for now, I'm really impressed, and I've learned a lot from what the panelists spoke about. And obviously we do know that there is criticism around this topic. So we just ask our audience to also have an open mind, even while they're being critical, because we need everyone to help solve the climate crisis. And with that, I would like to end the session and thank everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invite.
Thank you very much for the invite.